Dr. Emily Carter was finishing the last line of a patient chart when she heard it. A sharp scream, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps echoing down the corridor. At first, she thought it was another fight. On winter nights like this in Cleveland, Ohio, the emergency department often filled with people who had nowhere else to go. The homeless came in with frost-bitten fingers. The elderly came in alone, clutching chest pain and fear in equal measure. The waiting area was already crowded, the air thick with antiseptic and old coffee, the steady beep of heart monitors blending into a dull, exhausting rhythm. Emily rubbed her temples and stood up from the nurse's station. Then, the automatic doors burst open. A white shape lunged into the emergency hall, fast, silent, skidding slightly on the polished floor. For half a second, nobody understood what they were seeing. Then a nurse dropped her clipboard. Someone shouted. Another person screamed again, louder this time. Standing in the middle of the emergency department was a large white police dog. Not a stray, not a service animal, a K9. Its fur was thick and snow-pale, damp at the paws, as if it had just come in from outside. A black collar circled its neck, the metal tag swinging wildly as it moved. Its chest rose and fell hard, breath coming out in short, urgent bursts. Its eyes, dark, rimmed with red, scanned the room as if searching for something it could not afford to lose. Chaos exploded instantly. Patients pushed back against the walls. An elderly man nearly fell out of his wheelchair. A security guard reached for his radio. Someone yelled, "Lock it down!" Another voice shouted, "Get animal control!" Emily didn't move. She had seen fear before. Real fear. The kind that crawled up a person's spine and made their hands shake. But what she saw in the dog's eyes wasn't aggression. It wasn't confusion. It was desperation. The dog didn't bark. It didn't bare its teeth. It stood there, tense but controlled. Its nails scraped softly against the tile, as if every second mattered. Its head turned toward the hallway leading deeper into the hospital, toward intensive care. "Ma'am, step back!" a security guard shouted, his voice cracking. Emily took one step forward instead, her last shift. That was all she had wanted. One quiet night, then home. After 25 years in emergency medicine, she was tired in a way sleep no longer fixed. Tired of paperwork. Tired of arguing with insurance companies. Tired of watching people fall through the cracks of a system that promised care but rarely delivered it. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Behind her, a nurse whispered, "Emily, please." The dog's ears twitched at the sound of her voice. Slowly, deliberately, it turned its head and looked straight at her. Up close, Emily could see the fine tremor running through its body. Snow clung to the fur around its legs. There was a faint metallic smell in the air. Blood. Old. Dried. "This is a hospital!" a man yelled from the waiting area. "Someone's going to get hurt." Emily raised her hands, palms open, her voice calm but firm. "He hasn't hurt anyone." The words felt thin against the rising panic, but she meant them. Before anyone could respond, sirens wailed outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the frosted glass doors. Local police rushed in, weapons already drawn, the cold air following them inside. "Clear the area," a lieutenant barked. "That dog's trained to attack." The white dog stiffened at the sound of authority, but still, it did not move forward. Instead, it did something no one expected. It took 3 slow steps toward Emily, then stopped. Its eyes never left hers. For a brief, impossible moment, the emergency department fell silent. No screams, no shouting. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft, strained breathing of an animal that had crossed a city in winter for a reason no one yet understood. Emily swallowed. Whatever this was, whatever had driven a police K-9 to break into a public hospital, it wasn't random. And somewhere in this building, she realized, time was running out. Time was running out, and everyone in the room could feel it, even if they didn't yet know why. The lieutenant took 1 step forward, his gun steady. "Ma'am, move away from the dog, now." Emily didn't turn around. Her eyes stayed on the white K-9 standing just a few feet from her. The dog's breathing was still uneven, its chest rising too fast. But its posture remained controlled, disciplined, trained. This wasn't panic. This was urgency. Behind her, the emergency department was unraveling. A woman cried softly near the check-in desk, clutching her coat to her chest. A homeless man backed himself into a corner, muttering prayers under his breath. 2 nurses rushed to pull a gurney out of the hallway, nearly colliding with a janitor frozen in place, mop dripping onto the floor. Then, the dog moved, not forward, sideways. It turned its head sharply toward the east wing, toward the long corridor leading past radiology and into intensive care. Its ears stood straight up. A low sound escaped its throat. Not a growl, not a bark, but something strained, almost pleading. Emily felt it in her gut. "Do you hear that?" she said quietly. "What?" the lieutenant snapped. "That sound," Emily replied. "It's not aggression. It's communication." The lieutenant hesitated, just long enough for doubt to flicker across his face. He glanced at the other officers. None of them fired. Yet. The dog took a cautious step toward the corridor. "Stop it!" someone shouted. But before anyone could react, the dog did something that shifted the entire room. It sat down. Right there, on the cold hospital floor. Slowly, deliberately. It lowered its head and placed something between its front paws. A small, dark piece of fabric slid across the tile and came to rest near Emily's shoe. She looked down. It was a torn strip of cloth, thick, industrial, stained with old, dried blood. Emily knelt without thinking. "Emily!" a nurse gasped. "Don't!" She picked up the cloth. The smell hit her immediately. Iron, sweat, smoke. Not fresh, but not days old either. Her heart skipped. This came from a uniform, she said. The room went still. A younger officer stepped closer, squinting. That's police issue. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The white dog lifted its head and looked at Emily again. Its eyes were glassy now, rimmed with exhaustion. Snowmelt dripped from its fur, forming a small puddle beneath it. "How long has this dog been missing?" Emily asked. No one answered. Then a voice from the back, low, uneasy. 2 days. Emily turned. The officer who spoke looked barely 30, his face pale. K9 unit put out an alert. Name's Ghost. Partner went down during an operation. Classified case. Dog disappeared the same night. Ghost. The name seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning. Emily looked back at the dog. "Ghost," she said softly. His ears twitched. That was all the confirmation she needed. "You didn't come here by accident," she whispered. Ghost stood up again, energy flaring despite his fatigue. He paced 2 steps toward the ICU hallway, then stopped, looking back over his shoulder, waiting, leading. The lieutenant cursed under his breath. "This is insane." "No," Emily said, rising to her feet. "What's insane is ignoring this." She turned toward the nurse's station. "Pull the intake logs from the last 6 hours. Male patient. Severe trauma. No ID." A nurse blinked. We had one. Brought in by ambulance. Found near the river. Unresponsive." Emily's pulse quickened. "Where is he now?" "In ICU. Room 412. Ghost let out a sharp exhale. His tail struck the floor. Once. That was it. The lieutenant lowered his weapon. Just a fraction. "You're telling me this dog broke into a hospital to find his partner?" Emily met his eyes. "I'm telling you he crossed a frozen city in the middle of the night. Because he knew this was the last place that could save him." Silence pressed down on the room again. Somewhere in the distance, a heart monitor beeped, irregularly. Ghost turned and began walking toward the corridor. Slowly, purposefully, never once looking back to see if they were following. Emily did, and she followed him. Because whatever waited in room 412 wasn't just another patient. It was the reason Ghost was still standing. The corridor to the ICU felt longer than it ever had. Ghost walked ahead at a steady pace. His nails clicked softly against the linoleum. White fur streaked with melting snow. Emily followed a few steps behind him, aware of every eye on her back. Nurses whispered. A security guard trailed them nervously. 2 police officers kept their hands close to their holsters, not quite trusting what they were seeing. Fear didn't disappear. It changed shape. In the waiting area, they had panicked because the danger was unknown. Here, fear grew quieter, tighter, because it was beginning to make sense. "Emily," a nurse murmured as they passed the medication cart. "This isn't protocol." Emily didn't slow down. "Neither is ignoring a dying man." The words came out harsher than she intended, but she didn't take them back. She had spent decades watching people hide behind rules when things became uncomfortable. Tonight, the rules were starting to feel very far away. Ghost stopped suddenly in front of the ICU doors. The double doors were closed. Red letters glowed above them. Intensive Care Unit. Authorized personnel only. The dog lowered his head, breathing hard again. His body trembled, not with aggression, but with strain. Like a runner at the end of a marathon who refuses to collapse because someone else still needs him. Emily stepped up beside him. "You're sure?" she said quietly. Ghost didn't move. He pressed his nose gently against the door. One of the officers scoffed under his breath. "We're taking medical direction from a dog now?" Emily turned on him. "No. We're listening to instinct. Something your training used to respect." The officer fell silent. A nurse swiped her badge. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the ICU was dimmer, calmer. Machines hummed steadily, curtains half drawn. The smell here was sharper, sterile, precise, controlled. Ghost entered first. He walked straight down the aisle, ignoring every other room, every other sound, until he stopped in front of room 412. Then he sat. His tail thumped once against the floor. Emily felt a chill run through her, and it had nothing to do with the cold outside. She pushed the door open. Inside, a man lay motionless in the hospital bed. Tubes ran from his arms. A ventilator rose and fell with mechanical precision. His face was pale, bruised, the kind of gray that came from blood loss and shock. Emily stepped closer, scanning the monitors. Heart rate, unstable. Blood pressure, dropping. Oxygen, barely holding. "This patient came in unidentified," the ICU nurse said quietly. "No wallet, no phone. Trauma team stabilized him, but he crashed twice already." Emily swallowed. "How long ago?" 4 hours. Ghost moved to the side of the bed, slowly, carefully, as if aware of every wire and every tube. He lowered himself to the floor, rested his head against the metal frame of the bed. His eyes never left the man's face. A sound escaped his throat. Soft, broken, not a bark, a whine. The room fell completely silent. One of the officers took an involuntary step back. "Jesus." Emily reached for the patient's wrist, checked the pulse herself. Weak, fading. "What's his name?" she asked. The nurse hesitated. "We don't have one." Ghost's ears flattened. His body tensed, as if the absence of that single word, name, was unbearable. Emily exhaled slowly. "Get me the trauma attending," she said. "Now." The nurse nodded and rushed out. The lieutenant stepped forward. His voice was lower now. "Doctor, if this is who I think it is..." Emily looked up. "Then you already know what happens if we wait." The lieutenant's jaw tightened. He glanced at Ghost, then at the man in the bed. Whatever skepticism he'd had was draining away, replaced by something heavier. Guilt or shame. Ghost lifted his head suddenly. His eyes locked onto Emily's. She followed his gaze to the monitor. The heart rate dipped again. An alarm began to chirp. Emily reacted instantly. Prep the OR. Massive internal bleeding. He's crashing. But his consent, someone started. Emily cut them off. I'm assuming it. Ghost stood, pressed closer to the bed. His nose hovered inches from the man's hand. The trembling worsened now. Exhaustion finally breaking through discipline. You brought him here, Emily whispered, more to herself than anyone else. You didn't give up. The officer who had spoken earlier cleared his throat. Officer Daniel Brooks, he said quietly. That's him. Undercover assignment. They buried the name for safety. The words landed hard. Ghost let out a low sound and nudged Daniel's hand gently with his nose. Emily felt her chest tighten. All right, she said firmly. We're not losing him tonight. She turned toward the door as staff rushed in. Orders flying, stretchers moving. But before she stepped out, she looked back one last time. Ghost stayed where he was standing, guard. Not because he was trained to, but because instinct, older than any rule book, was telling him that leaving now would mean losing everything. The ICU doors burst open as the trauma attending arrived. Coat half buttoned, eyes already scanning the monitors. What do we have? He asked. Emily didn't hesitate. Male, mid-40s, multiple gunshot wounds, internal bleeding. He's crashing. The attending frowned. No ID, no consent. Surgery authorization? Emily met his gaze. If we wait for paperwork, he won't make it. Before he could respond, the heart monitor shrieked again, sharp, insistent. Daniel's blood pressure dropped another notch. The ventilator hissed, struggling to keep pace. Damn it, the attending muttered. Prep the OR. A nurse hesitated. Doctor, hospital policy. Emily turned to her, voice low but unyielding. Policy doesn't bleed out on this table. He does. The nurse nodded and moved. Behind them, the lieutenant stepped closer. His voice was rough. If this goes sideways, the department will want answers. Emily didn't look at him. Then they can come talk to me. As staff rushed to transfer Daniel to the gurney, Ghost suddenly moved, stepping directly into their path. Hey! A nurse exclaimed. Ghost planted his paws firmly on the floor, blocking the stretcher. His body was rigid now, every muscle drawn tight. His eyes flicked between the doctors and Daniel, confusion and fear colliding in his gaze. Emily dropped to one knee without thinking. Ghost, she said softly. We're helping him. The dog let out a low, broken sound, pressing closer to Daniel's side. His nose brushed Daniel's fingers, as if memorizing the feel of him. We don't have time for this, the attending snapped. Emily placed a hand gently on Ghost's shoulder. She could feel the tremor under his fur. You did your job, she whispered. Now let us do ours. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, slowly, Ghost stepped aside. As the gurney rolled past, he followed, right up to the doors of the operating room, before security finally intervened. "I'm sorry, buddy," one guard murmured, blocking his path. Ghost tried to push forward, a quiet whine building in his chest. "No," Emily said firmly, standing between them. "He stays here." The attending shot her a look. "Emily, he's not a threat," she said. "He's family." The words surprised even her. The doors to the OR swung shut, cutting off the rush of voices and light. Silence flooded the hallway again, heavier than before. Ghost sank to the floor immediately, legs folding beneath him. He curled near the wall, eyes locked on the closed doors, chest heaving as exhaustion finally claimed its due. Emily leaned against the opposite wall, adrenaline drained from her body in a dizzying rush. Her hands were shaking now. She pressed them together, forcing herself to stay upright. The lieutenant cleared his throat. "You understand what you just did?" "Yes," Emily replied. "I do. You overrode consent. You bypassed protocol." She looked at Ghost. "I listened." The lieutenant followed her gaze. For a long moment, he said nothing. "I've been on the force 22 years, he said finally. "I've seen K-9s pull bodies out of burning cars, take bullets meant for their handlers." His voice tightened. "But I've never seen one do this." Ghost lifted his head slightly at the sound of the man's voice, then lowered it again, eyes never leaving the OR doors. Minutes dragged into an hour. Nurses passed quietly. Phones rang and stopped. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. The sound thin and distant. Time seemed to stretch, bending around that single set of doors. Time back to Hunman. Emily checked the clock on the wall. Every second felt like a verdict. She knelt beside Ghost again. "You crossed half the city for him," she murmured. "Didn't you?" Ghost's ears twitched. Snowstorm, traffic, cold that cuts through bone. She swallowed. "You didn't stop." Ghost shifted closer to her, his head brushing her knee. Light, fleeting contact. Not comfort. Permission. Emily felt something crack open in her chest. The OR doors finally opened. The attending stepped out, mask pulled down, eyes tired but alert. "Well?" the lieutenant demanded. The attending exhaled slowly. "He's alive. We stopped the bleeding. He lost a lot of blood, but..." He paused. "He's a fighter." Emily closed her eyes, breath shuddering out of her. The lieutenant let out a long curse and turned away. Ghost was already on his feet. He moved toward the attending, tail wagging once, hesitant, restrained, before stopping short, remembering the boundary. "Hey," the attending said softly, crouching. "Your partner's tough." Ghost's ears shot up. For the first time since entering the hospital, Ghost barked. Once, sharp, clear, not fear, relief. Emily felt tears sting her eyes as she watched the white dog stand tall again, posture straightening, duty fulfilled, for the moment, but not finished. Because surviving the surgery was only the beginning, and whatever had put Daniel Brooks on that table was still waiting to surface. The hallway outside the operating room slowly returned to motion, but the tension didn't disappear. It only changed shape. Doctors moved on to the next crisis. Nurses whispered updates into phones. Somewhere down the corridor, a cart rattled, then faded away. Yet Ghost remained exactly where he was, sitting upright, eyes fixed on the closed ICU doors, as if his body had been carved into the floor. Emily watched him from a short distance, arms folded tightly across her chest. Now that the adrenaline was gone, she noticed the details she'd missed before. The dog's paws were raw and cracked, pads reddened from ice and road salt. His fur, once pristine white, was matted along the chest and legs with grime and dried blood. One ear bore a thin scar, barely visible under the fur. This wasn't a young K9 in his prime. This was a veteran. A nurse approached quietly and crouched a few feet away. "He hasn't moved since the surgery ended." Emily nodded. "He won't. Not yet." The nurse hesitated. "Animal control is on their way." Emily's jaw tightened. "Tell them to wait." The nurse looked unsure. "Hospital administration." "I'll handle administration," Emily said. Her voice left no room for argument. Ghost shifted slightly, as if sensing the change in conversation. His head turned toward Emily. For the first time, his gaze lingered, not searching now, but assessing. She took a step closer. "You did all of this for him," she said quietly. "Didn't you, Ghost?" His ears flicked forward. A younger officer leaned against the wall nearby, arms crossed. "K9 unit's been tearing the city apart looking for him," he said. "Snowstorm slowed everything. They thought Ghost ran." Emily glanced, back at Ghost. "He didn't run." The officer followed her gaze and swallowed. "No," he said. "He didn't." The lieutenant returned, phone pressed to his ear, his tone sharp, controlled. "Yes, sir. He's alive. Barely. Yes, I understand." He hung up and turned to Emily. "Internal Affairs is already asking questions." Emily didn't flinch. "They always do. They want to know why a civilian doctor took medical direction from a police dog." Emily allowed herself a tired smile. "I didn't. I took direction from experience." The lieutenant studied Ghost again. Longer this time. "That dog saved his partner's life." Emily nodded. "And nearly lost his own doing it." As if on cue, Ghost's body trembled again. Harder now. His breathing became shallow, uneven. Emily knelt beside him without thinking, ignoring the polished shoes and pressed uniforms around her. She reached out slowly, letting Ghost see her hand. "Easy," she murmured. Her fingers brushed his shoulder. He flinched, just slightly, then relaxed. His head dipped, resting against her knee. the weight heavier than she expected. The room seemed to hold its breath. A nurse whispered, "I've never seen that." Emily felt warmth soak through the fabric of her scrubs. Ghost's body radiated exhaustion, the kind that went deeper than muscle. This was what happened after duty, when the body finally accepted it was safe enough to feel pain. "You crossed 10 miles in sub-zero weather," Emily said softly. "Traffic, ice, sirens. You didn't stop." Ghost let out a faint sound, almost a sigh. A paramedic watching from the Kissaung doorway spoke. "That dog showed more determination than half the people I know." The words hung heavy. Animal control finally arrived. 2 men in heavy jackets, calm, cautious. "That's him?" one asked. Emily rose slowly, placing herself between them and Ghost. "He's not going anywhere." The man frowned. "Ma'am, protocol." "Protocol can wait," Emily said. "He hasn't slept. He hasn't eaten. He hasn't left that door because his partner is on the other side of it." The man hesitated, then lowered his hands. "We'll stand by." Ghost lifted his head at the sound of footsteps from inside the ICU. A nurse stepped out quietly. "He's stable, still unconscious, but stable." Ghost rose to his feet immediately, posture straightening. Fatigue pushed aside by sheer will. Emily felt her throat tighten. "He hears everything," she said. The nurse nodded. "We can allow a brief visit." The door opened. Ghost entered the ICU with careful steps, every movement deliberate. He approached Daniel's bed and stopped, nose hovering inches from his partner's hand. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, Daniel's fingers twitched. Ghost let out a low sound. His tail wagged once, restrained, respectful. Emily watched from the doorway, chest aching. This wasn't training. This wasn't obedience. This was loyalty. The kind that doesn't make headlines, doesn't earn promotions, but saves lives when no one else knows what to do. Ghost lay down beside the bed, head resting against the frame once more. And for the first time since breaking into the hospital, he closed his eyes. Ghost did not sleep long. Emily noticed it when the ICU lights dimmed further and the night shift settled into its slow, heavy rhythm. The dog's eyes opened suddenly, sharp, alert, as if pulled awake by something no one else could hear. His body tensed, muscles tightening beneath the white fur. Then he rose quietly to his feet. Emily straightened from her chair. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Ghost didn't look at her. His attention was fixed down the hallway, past the nurse's station, toward the far end of the ICU wing, where the corridors bent into shadows. The machines around Daniel Brooks continued their steady hum. Nothing on the monitors suggested trouble, and yet, Ghost stepped back. One slow step, then another. Emily stood, heart beginning to beat faster. "Ghost," she said softly. "Daniel's here. He's stable." The dog turned his head toward her, just for a second. His eyes were different now, focused, urgent, not afraid, warning. Then he moved. Ghost walked past the nurse's station, nails barely making a sound. His posture low, controlled. A nurse looked up from her computer, startled. "Hey, where's he going?" Emily followed without answering. Ghost stopped near the end of the hallway, in front of a closed supply room door. He sniffed once, sharp, then sat down and stared at the handle. Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. "That room's been locked all night," the nurse said. "Just storage." Ghost didn't move. He lifted his head and let out a quiet, strained sound, deep in his chest. Not a bark, not a whine. Recognition hit Emily like a blow. "This is how he led me before," she murmured. "He doesn't guess. He knows." She reached for the door handle. The nurse hesitated. "Dr. Carter, this is restricted." Emily opened the door. The lights flickered on. Metal shelves. Medical crates. Rolling carts. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. Then Emily smelled it. Blood. Fresh this time. Ghost stepped inside and stopped beside a cart pushed hastily against the wall. He lowered his head and stared at the floor beneath it. Emily crouched. A thin trail of dark red streaked across the tile, partially wiped, but not enough. Someone had rushed. Someone had made a mistake. Her pulse spiked. "Call security," she said, already pulling the cart aside. Behind it lay a discarded jacket. Dark blue. Police issue. A bullet hole tore through the fabric, edges still damp. The nurse's face drained of color. "That's not from tonight's surgery." "No," Emily said quietly. "It's not." Ghost moved again, circling once, then trotting back toward the ICU entrance. He stopped halfway and looked back at Emily. Waiting. Leading. Emily followed, mind racing. Back near the nurse's station, a different officer stood on his phone. When he saw Emily approaching, Ghost at her side, he stiffened. "You," Emily said, holding up the jacket. "Where did you get this?" The officer blinked. I don't know what you're talking about." Ghost growled. Low, controlled, dangerous. The officer took an involuntary step back. "Easy," Emily said, holding up a hand toward Ghost. Then, to the officer, "Daniel Brooks was shot more than once. We stabilized what we could see, but someone tried to clean this up. Why?" Before the officer could answer, the lieutenant appeared, eyes sharp. "What's going on?" Emily held up the jacket. This was hidden in a supply room. There's blood leading straight from it to the ICU. The lieutenant swore under his breath. "That shouldn't be possible." "Unless," Emily said slowly, "someone didn't want certain injuries documented." Silence fell, like a weight. Ghost stood perfectly still between them. Ears up, eyes locked on the officer, not threatening, judging. The officer's voice cracked. "It wasn't supposed to go like that. The call went bad. Brooks wasn't meant to survive. The words hit hard. Emily felt her stomach turn. You left him bleeding in the cold. I panicked, the officer said. They said the case was sensitive. That paperwork could wait. Ghost stepped forward. 1 pace. The officer broke. I'm sorry. Security arrived seconds later. Orders snapped through the air. The lieutenant took control. Emily barely heard them. Her eyes were on Ghost. The dog's posture slowly relaxed. Mission fulfilled once more. Not just bringing Daniel to the hospital, but exposing the truth that had nearly killed him. Emily knelt and placed a hand on Ghost's shoulder. You weren't just saving him, she whispered. You were protecting him. Ghost exhaled. Long, heavy, as if releasing something he'd been carrying since the night Daniel went down. Behind them, snow continued to fall, outside the hospital windows. Quiet, relentless. While inside, a different kind of storm finally began to clear. The hospital felt different after that. Not louder, not quieter. Heavier. Emily stood near the nurses' station, watching 2 internal affairs officers escort the shaken patrolman down the hallway. His head was bowed, jacket gone, hands trembling. No one spoke as he passed. The truth had a way of draining sound from a room. Ghost sat beside Emily, posture alert, but calm now, as if the sharpest edge of his mission had finally dulled. His eyes followed the officers until they disappeared around the corner. You knew, Emily murmured. Didn't you? Ghost didn't look at her, but his ears shifted, just slightly. The lieutenant returned, rubbing his forehead. He looked older than he had an hour ago. This just turned into a federal mess, he said. Brooks wasn't just undercover. He was gathering evidence on a protection ring inside the department. Low level at first, then bigger. Emily crossed her arms. And someone decided it was safer if he didn't make it. The lieutenant nodded grimly. Someone tried. A nurse stepped out of the ICU. Dr. Carter, his vitals are stable, but there's something else. Emily followed her back into Daniel's room. Daniel Brooks lay still, sedated, chest rising steadily now. The bruises on his face looked darker under the ICU lights. Emily reviewed the scans on the screen. Bullet fragments, she said quietly. They missed one. The nurse nodded. It's lodged near the shoulder blade. Not immediately fatal, but it tells a story. Emily exhaled slowly. Ghost stood at the foot of the bed, eyes fixed on Daniel, but his body angled toward the door, listening. They didn't want this documented, Emily said. If it stayed inside him, it could be explained away later. Accident, the nurse whispered, or bad street luck. Ghost's tail thumped once against the floor. Not approval, recognition. Emily stepped closer to the bed. He trusted someone, she said softly. Someone he shouldn't have. Outside, snow continued to fall, thick, relentless. Cleveland in winter had a way of burying things. Cars, streets, memories, truth, too. The lieutenant's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then at Emily. Brooks's handler file just got unlocked. Ghost was trained for scent tracking under extreme conditions. Ice, water, low visibility. Emily's gaze drifted to Ghost. He followed the blood. Not just blood, the lieutenant said. Fear, stress, adrenaline. That dog could track his partner across a frozen river if he had to. Emily felt a tightness in her chest. And he did. The lieutenant nodded. Daniel collapsed near the old industrial flats. Ambulance crew picked him up by chance. If Ghost hadn't followed, if he hadn't kept going. He didn't finish the sentence. Ghost moved closer to the bed, lowered his head until it rested near Daniel's hand. The machines hummed on. Indifferent witnesses to loyalty no training manual could fully explain. Emily reached out and gently touched Daniel's arm. When he wakes up, she said, he's going to have a lot to answer for. Yeah, the lieutenant replied. But thanks to Ghost, he'll actually get that chance. A moment passed. Then, Ghost lifted his head suddenly. Emily followed his gaze. The heart monitor flickered. Daniel's fingers twitched. Once. Then again. His brow creased faintly, as if fighting his way back through darkness. Daniel? Emily said, leaning in. His eyes didn't open, but his hand moved. Slow. Searching. Ghost pressed closer, placed his nose gently against Daniel's knuckles. Daniel's fingers curled. Just barely. Ghost froze. Breath caught in his chest. Then his tail began to move, slow, careful, as if afraid that joy itself might break the moment. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. He knows, she whispered. The nurse smiled through her exhaustion. Looks like he's not alone anymore. Outside the window, snow piled higher against the glass. Beneath it, a city slept. Unaware that a secret meant to stay buried under ice had surfaced, because a dog refused to let go. Ghost settled back down, eyes never leaving Daniel's face. The worst night wasn't over yet, but for the first time since Ghost had burst through those hospital doors, hope felt solid enough to stand on. Morning crept into the hospital without ceremony. A pale gray light slipped through narrow windows, settling over the ICU like a thin layer of dust. The snowstorm outside had eased, but Cleveland still looked frozen in place. Cars buried, sidewalks silent, the city holding its breath. Inside, the tension had not lifted. Emily stood at the glass wall of the ICU, coffee untouched in her hand. She hadn't slept. None of them had. Daniel Brooks remained unconscious. Stable, but fragile. His name was still absent from every official board and digital chart. To the hospital system, he was patient 412. To Ghost, he was everything. The dog lay near the foot of Daniel's bed. Awake now, alert. He hadn't left the room since the night before. Not to eat, not to drink. Each time a nurse tried to coax him away, Ghost simply shifted his body, never aggressive, never disobedient, placing himself where he could still see Daniel's face. "He's guarding him," one nurse whispered. "Like it's still his job." Emily nodded. "For Ghost, it is." The ICU doors opened again, this time with less urgency and more weight. Two men in dark coats stepped inside, their expressions careful, restrained. Federal badges flashed briefly, then disappeared back into pockets. The lieutenant followed behind them, jaw tight. Emily straightened. "What's happening?" One of the men spoke quietly. "Officer Daniel Brooks is now under federal protection. His identity remains sealed." Emily let out a slow breath. "Even now?" "Especially now," the agent replied. "What he uncovered didn't end with the arrest last night." Emily glanced at Daniel, then at Ghost. He was brought in without ID, no phone, no name. "That wasn't an accident," the agent said. "Brooks knew if something went wrong, he'd be erased before anyone could ask questions." Ghost lifted his head at the sound of Daniel's name, his ears angled forward. The second agent noticed. "That dog recognized his name." "He always does," Emily said softly. The agent studied Ghost. K9 records show Ghost completed his last active duty assessment 3 months ago. They were planning to retire him. Arthritis, slower response time. Emily felt a flash of anger. And yet, he outran a cover-up. The agent didn't disagree. Across the ICU, a television flickered on, muted. A local news channel showed footage, blurred lights, officers moving through snow, speculation crawling across the screen. Emily looked away. "We can't let the media near him." "They won't," the agent replied. "Officially, Daniel Brooks doesn't exist." Ghost rose to his feet suddenly, moved closer to Daniel's head, body stiffening, nose lifting, testing the air. Emily stepped forward. "What is it?" Ghost didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply stood, focused. Then Daniel's breathing changed. The monitor responded instantly. A sharp shift in rhythm. A nurse rushed in. "Heart rate's climbing," she said. "He's coming out." Emily leaned closer. "Daniel?" His brow furrowed, lips parted. Ghost pressed closer, shoulder touching the bed. Daniel's eyes opened, just a fraction. Confusion clouded them. Then, his gaze found Ghost. A faint sound escaped his throat. Something between a breath and a word. "Good boy." Ghost's tail wagged once, then again. The nurse smiled despite herself. "That's the strongest response we've seen." Emily felt her chest tighten. Daniel's eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion pulling him under. But his hand moved, slow, deliberate, until his fingers brushed Ghost's fur. Ghost did not move. He didn't need to. The agents stepped back, giving the room space. Even they seemed reluctant to break the moment. Outside, the city began to wake. Traffic resumed. Radios crackled. Somewhere a story was already being shaped. Half-truths, omissions, careful language. But inside room 412, there were no titles, no ranks, no badges, just a man who had nearly been erased, and a dog who refused to let that happen. Emily exhaled and finally sipped her cold coffee. She didn't mind the bitterness. The lieutenant approached quietly. When this breaks, and it will, people are going to ask questions about the hospital, about you. Emily met his gaze. Let them. He nodded. You stood your ground. She looked at Ghost. So did he. Outside, the snow began to melt. Water streaked down the glass. Beneath it, Cleveland stirred back to life, unaware that one of its quietest heroes lay behind a sealed door, protected not by policy, but by loyalty. Ghost settled back down beside the bed, eyes open, watchful. Daniel Brooks was still unnamed to the world, but he was no longer alone. By late afternoon, the hospital had slipped into a strange lull, the kind that came after a crisis, but before relief. Outside, slush replaced snow along the sidewalks. The sky hung low, colorless. Inside the ICU, Daniel Brooks hovered between stability and collapse, his condition balanced on decisions made hours earlier. Emily stood with the attending physician, reviewing the latest labs. The numbers were worse than she expected. He's bleeding internally again, the attending said quietly. Slow this time, harder to catch. Emily's jaw tightened. From where? Somewhere we can't reach without going back in, he replied. Another surgery. High risk. Emily glanced through the glass at room 412. Ghost was on his feet, not pacing, not whining, standing, rigid, alert. His head was lifted, as if he felt the shift before any machine could. The dog's breathing quickened, ears angled forward, eyes locked on Daniel's bed. Emily felt her stomach drop. She pushed into the room. The monitor told the story before anyone spoke. Blood pressure falling, oxygen saturation dipping. A thin alarm began to chirp, growing sharper by the second. Call the OR, Emily said. Now. A nurse hesitated. Dr. Carter, we're almost out of matched blood. Emily froze. How low? She asked. Critically, the nurse replied. We can't guarantee coverage if he crashes again. The words hit harder than any siren. Across the room, Ghost let out a soft, broken sound. Emily crouched beside him, placing a steady hand against his shoulder. Not yet, she whispered. Please, not yet. The attending stepped closer. Emily, if we take him back in without enough blood, he'll die, Emily finished. Yes. Silence swallowed the room. Hospital administration appeared at the door moments later. Suits replacing scrubs, faces tight, voices measured. We can't authorize another surgery without resources, one of them said. Liability alone. Emily cut him off. This isn't about liability. It's about a man bleeding out in front of us. And if he dies on the table? Another administrator asked. Who answers for that? Emily didn't hesitate. I do. The administrator sighed. You already took responsibility once tonight. I know. Behind them, Ghost stepped forward, placing himself between Emily and Daniel's bed. He lowered his head, pressing his body closer to the gurney, as if bracing against something unseen. The attending looked at the dog, then back at Emily. Even if we wanted to proceed, he said, we don't have the blood. Emily's mind raced. Emergency donors? It's late, the nurse replied. And the storm? Ghost's head snapped up. He turned, trotting toward the door, then stopped, looked back at Emily, waiting. Emily felt a flicker of recognition. No, she murmured. You can't. Ghost barked once, sharp, urgent. The lieutenant frowned. What is he doing? Emily's pulse pounded. Ghost doesn't do theatrics, she said. If he's moving, there's a reason. Ghost paced again, then returned, nose brushing Emily's leg. He turned back toward the hall. Emily stood. He wants us to follow. This is a hospital, not a scavenger hunt, an administrator snapped. Emily met his gaze. Then explain why he's been right every time so far. The room fell quiet. Finally, the lieutenant nodded. I'll go. Emily followed Ghost down the hall, heart racing, past the ICU, past radiology, toward the main entrance. Outside, near the blood donation center, a small crowd had gathered. Off-duty officers, hospital staff, civilians still wearing winter coats. A handwritten sign hung crookedly on the door. Emergency blood drive. Walk-ins welcome. Ghost stopped. Emily stared. A nurse approached, breathless. Word got out. Police radio, social media. People just started showing up. Emily felt her throat tighten. Types O negative and O positive, the nurse said. We're testing as fast as we can. Ghost stood tall beside Emily, tail still, eyes scanning the line of strangers. Men and women stepped forward. Construction workers, retirees, a woman with a grocery bag still in her hand. I heard an officer got shot, one man said quietly. Didn't feel right staying home. Emily swallowed hard. Within minutes, coolers were being wheeled back toward the ICU. Hope returned. Fragile. Trembling. Back in room 412, Daniel's vitals continued to drop. Ghost returned to his place beside the bed. Posture rigid once more. Emily took a deep breath. Prep the OR, she said. We're not done fighting. This wasn't the victory. This was the bottom. And if they were going to climb out, it would cost everything they had left. The operating room lights burned white, unforgiving. Emily stood at the scrub sink. Water pounded over her hands as she tried to steady her breathing. The hallway outside buzzed with movement. Coolers rolling. Nurses calling out blood types. Phones ringing with updates from the donation center. Time, once again, was tightening its grip. The attending surgeon stepped beside her. We're still short, he said quietly. We have enough to start. Not enough if things go wrong. Emily nodded. She already knew. Across the glass, Daniel Brooks lay motionless on the gurney, chest rising, unevenly. The bruising along his side had darkened, spreading like a stain no one could erase. Ghost stood just beyond the yellow line outside the OR, posture rigid, eyes locked on Daniel. He hadn't moved since they wheeled him back. A hospital administrator approached. Tie loosened. Voice low, but urgent. "Dr. Carter, before you go in, this needs to be said." Emily turned, water still dripping from her fingers. "This surgery does not have full authorization," the administrator said. "Federal status, missing consent, incomplete resources. If the outcome is negative, I understand," Emily said. "You could lose your license." "I understand. You could lose everything you've worked for." Emily finally met his eyes. "If I walk away now," she said, "I lose it anyway." The administrator exhaled sharply. "This isn't how healthcare is supposed to work." "No," Emily replied, "but this is how people survive." She turned back to the sink, shut off the water. Behind her, a nurse whispered, "Dr. Carter, are you sure?" Emily dried her hands slowly. "I've never been more sure of anything." Inside the OR, the team assembled in silence. No speeches, no reassurances, just the heavy awareness that this operation sat in the gray space between medicine and consequence. "Scalpel," the surgeon said. Emily watched the first incision. The familiar scent of antiseptic gave way to something sharper, more real. The monitors flickered. Numbers shifted with each careful movement. Minutes passed. Then more. Blood loss increased. "Pressure's dropping," the anesthesiologist warned. Emily glanced at the remaining supply. Too little. Still too little. Outside, Ghost paced once, just once before settling again. Eyes fixed on the closed doors. A nurse crouched nearby, murmuring softly. Ghost didn't respond. He didn't need comfort. He needed results. Inside the OR, the surgeon cursed under his breath. "We found it. Secondary tear. Deeper than expected." Emily felt her pulse spike. "Can you stop it?" "Yes," he said. "But it'll cost blood we don't have." Emily didn't hesitate. "Use it." The anesthesiologist hesitated. "Emily, use it," she said again. Firmer. The room moved. Sutures, suction, commands snapping through the air. The monitor wavered, then steadied. Emily's shoulders sagged as the bleeding slowed. The surgeon leaned back. Exhaustion etched into his face. "We're clear," he said finally. "He's holding." No one spoke. Then, the anesthesiologist let out a long breath. "Vitals stabilizing. Time 600 mems." Emily closed her eyes. Relief crashed over her so hard she had to grip the edge of the table. Outside, the OR doors opened. Ghost stood immediately. Emily stepped out. Mask pulled down. Hair plastered to her forehead. She nodded once. "He made it," she said. Ghost let out a sound. Deep, full, unmistakable. His tail wagged, restrained, but relentless, thumping softly against the floor. He pressed his head briefly against Emily's leg, grounding her in the moment. The administrator approached again, face pale. "This conversation isn't over," he said. Emily nodded. "I know." She watched as Daniel was wheeled back toward the ICU, alive, barely, but undeniably. Down the hall, the blood drive continued. Strangers still rolling up sleeves for someone they would never meet. Emily leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how close she had come to losing everything. Ghost settled beside her, eyes following Daniel until he disappeared behind the ICU doors. "You did your part," Emily whispered. "All of you did." Ghost's ears flicked. Somewhere deep in the hospital, a line had been crossed. Not out of recklessness, out of refusal. And as Emily straightened, preparing to face whatever came next, internal affairs, hospital boards, federal inquiries. She knew one thing with absolute clarity. She would make the same decision again. Every time. The ICU settled into a hush that felt earned, not accidental. After the second surgery, Daniel Brooks lay motionless beneath warm blankets. Machines hummed in a careful, measured rhythm. The numbers on the monitor no longer screamed for attention. They breathed, slow, steady, fragile, but alive. Emily stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded, eyes fixed on the rise and fall of Daniel's chest. Her body ached now that the crisis had loosened its grip. Every decision she'd made over the past 24 hours replayed in her mind. Sharp, unrelenting. There would be consequences. She knew that. But not tonight. Tonight belonged to survival. Ghost remained beside the bed, closer than before, his body angled protectively toward Daniel's shoulder. He had not barked since the OR doors opened. He had not paced. He simply stood watch, as if sound itself might disturb whatever delicate balance had been restored. A nurse entered quietly to check vitals, then froze when Ghost lifted his head. "It's okay," Emily whispered. "He won't interfere." The nurse nodded and moved slowly, respectfully, as though sharing space with something sacred. When she finished, she stepped back and exhaled. "I've worked ICU for 15 years, she said softly. "I've never seen anything like this." Emily didn't answer. She was watching Ghost. The dog's eyes never left Daniel's face, not for a second. A security supervisor appeared in the doorway, clearing his throat. "Hospital administration wants the dog removed," he said. Apologetic, but firm. "They're worried about policy violations, liability." Emily felt a flicker of anger, sharp, immediate. "He's not a violation," she said. "He's the reason that man is still breathing." The supervisor hesitated. "They're insisting." Emily turned to Ghost and crouched beside him. "They're scared," she murmured. "That doesn't mean they're right." Ghost shifted slightly, pressing his shoulder against the bed frame, unwilling to move. The supervisor sighed. "Give me 5 minutes," he said quietly. "That's all I can buy you." "Thank you," Emily replied. The minutes stretched. The ICU clock ticked loudly now, each second amplified by exhaustion. Emily sank into a chair near the wall, rubbing her eyes. For the first time since Ghost had burst into the hospital, she allowed herself to feel how close everything had come to falling apart. Across the room, Daniel stirred. Emily stood instantly. His breathing changed, deeper now, less mechanical. His brow furrowed, lips parted, as if searching for words buried under layers of sedation. "Daniel," Emily said gently, "you're safe." His eyelids fluttered. Ghost leaned in, nose hovering inches from Daniel's cheek. Daniel's eyes opened, this time fully. Confusion clouded them at first. White lights, tubes, the unfamiliar weight of pain. Then his gaze shifted and locked onto Ghost. Time seemed to pause. "Hey," Daniel rasped. Ghost let out a quiet sound, something between a breath and a whine, and pressed his head carefully against Daniel's shoulder. Daniel's hand lifted with effort, fingers trembling as they found Ghost's fur. His grip tightened, weak, but deliberate. "You found me," he whispered. Emily felt her chest tighten. "Yes," she said softly. "He did." Daniel swallowed hard. "Good boy." Ghost's tail wagged once, then stilled. His body relaxed for the first time, tension melting out of him as if a switch had been flipped. A tear slid down Daniel's temple and disappeared into the pillow. "I thought," his voice broke, "I thought I was done." Emily stepped closer. "You're not," she said. "Not yet." Daniel's eyes flicked to her. "They tried to bury it," he said. "The evidence, the names." Emily nodded. "We know." Daniel's grip tightened briefly in Ghost's fur. "Don't let it die with me." "It won't," Emily promised. The security supervisor returned, then paused when he saw Daniel awake. Surprise softened into something like relief. "He's conscious?" he asked. "Briefly," Emily replied. "Enough." The supervisor glanced at Ghost, then back at Emily. "Administration can wait," he said. "So can liability." Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Ghost lowered himself beside the bed and lay down, head resting against the frame once more. His eyes stayed open, but the sharp edge was gone now, replaced by quiet vigilance. The ICU lights dimmed further as night reclaimed the hospital. Outside, Cleveland settled into uneasy calm, unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding behind sealed doors. Emily took one last look at Daniel. Alive, conscious, no longer erased, and then at Ghost. "You can rest," she whispered. Ghost didn't close his eyes. Not yet. The news didn't break all at once. It seeped out, quiet at first, like a crack forming under pressure. By the next morning, unmarked cars lined the curb outside the hospital. Men and women in dark coats moved with purpose through the halls, voices low, eyes alert. Emily noticed the change immediately. Hospitals had a rhythm. When it shifted, you felt it in your bones. Inside room 412, Daniel Brooks slept again. Sedated, so his body could recover. The monitors were steady now, their soft beeps no longer sharp with warning. Ghost remained beside the bed, alert, but calmer, as if he finally believed the danger had eased. Emily reviewed a chart when the door opened. The lieutenant stepped in, followed by two men she hadn't seen before, older, composed. Their badges caught the light just long enough to be recognized. Federal. "We need a moment," one of them said gently. Emily nodded and stepped aside. She didn't look at Ghost, but she felt him shift closer to Daniel's bed. Posture firm. "We've confirmed Brooks's statement," the agent said. "Cross-referenced with internal logs, dispatch recordings, financial records." Emily folded her arms. And the attempt on his life wasn't random, the agent continued. It was a cleanup. The words landed heavily. 3 officers, the lieutenant added, all tied to evidence suppression, one already confessed. Emily closed her eyes briefly. So Ghost wasn't just saving a partner. No, the agent said. He was protecting a case that could have disappeared forever. Ghost lifted his head at the sound of Daniel's name. Ears angled forward. The agent glanced at the Sutton dog. "We reviewed the body cam footage. Ghost stayed with him until backup arrived. Wouldn't leave, even after Brooks lost consciousness." Emily swallowed. "Then he tracked him across the city." "Yes," the agent replied. "In a snowstorm." Silence settled in the room. Across the hall, a television murmured. Muted headlines. Emily caught a glimpse of her own hospital. Carefully framed shots. Cautious wording. No names. No accusations. Not yet. "They're calling it an internal review," the lieutenant said bitterly, "trying to buy time." "That won't hold," the agent replied. "Not anymore." He handed Emily a thin folder. "Your statement about the unauthorized surgery." Emily took it without looking. "I expected this." The agent studied her. "So did we." She met his gaze. "If you're asking whether I'd do it again." "We're not," he said. "We're telling you it saved a life and uncovered a crime." Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Ghost rose suddenly and moved closer to Daniel's head. Body tense. Not with alarm, but recognition. Daniel stirred. His eyes opened slowly, clearer than before. "Emily," he said hoarsely. She stepped forward. "I'm here." Daniel shifted, wincing. "Did it come out?" The truth? She asked. He nodded faintly. Yes, she said. It did. Relief crossed his face. His gaze slid to Ghost. Knew you wouldn't let it die. Ghost leaned in, pressing his head gently against Daniel's shoulder. Daniel's hand found his fur again, weak, but steady. They tried to make it look clean, Daniel murmured. Accident, exposure, weather. We know, the agent said. Daniel's eyes sharpened. Good. The room felt different then, lighter, even as the weight of what came next still loomed. Consequences would follow. Hearings, charges, careers would end. But something irreversible had already happened. The lie had cracked. Ghost stepped back and sat, posture tall, eyes moving calmly from face to face. For the first time since he'd burst into the hospital, he looked finished, not tired, complete. Emily watched him, heart tight. You did it, she whispered. Ghost's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, the city stirred. Reporters gathered. Questions formed. The story would come, whether anyone wanted it to or not. Inside room 412, a man who had nearly been erased was alive. The case meant to disappear was breathing again, and a white police dog, written off as old, expendable, had turned everything upside down without ever breaking the rules that mattered most. Loyalty, truth, refusal.